Hello, weekly update number 5. Busy week here for me. Lots of training going on, lots of new business, juggling childcare, etc., etc. So it's a busy time with the UK summer holidays. But here I am, weekly update number 5. This week I am talking about three things. The UK's AI dependency problem and what the government is wanting to do about it. OpenAI hitting the brakes, and Google buying a dead airline's inbox. So some interesting stories this week. The first one then is this story, which is all about the UK government, really, and they have highlighted or they have noted that they need to have a bit of a think about what happens when frontier models get kind of pulled. And this harks back to the story back in June when OpenAI pulled the Fable Mythos model from general usage. It only lasted for a couple of weeks. But of course, what it did mean was that those people relying on it, and I was one of them using it for Claude Code, sorry, I said OpenAI, Anthropic, should I say, pulled the model. And, it's a thing, right? Because we're dependent on these models and sometimes frontier models to do work in our organization. What happened was that the Cabinet Office has commissioned now an urgent assessment of what it would cost the UK economy if British businesses lost access to the newest AI models, which, it's worth looking at. And I think it's encouraging that the government is doing this. They've spotted there's a potential risk, both from a business point of view and I guess like a national security point of view, as well as time goes on and we're using models from kind of other countries. So that was the trigger with this kind of temporary ban back in June on using the frontier models from Anthropic. And what the UK government have told the Financial Times, which is where I saw this story first break on, I think it was the 18th, was that we could get left behind, right? Even if it's just for a couple of weeks, what would that mean? And it's a real thing because these models ultimately are owned by large organizations and they're offshore. They're not in the UK. And we don't have comparable models in the UK. So we can't just say this is a risk by British. That just doesn't work. We are beholden to, at the moment, lots of US companies, but also, there's Chinese models and other ones coming out from all around the world. So we just got to kind of have a bit of a think about that. So that's that at the macro kind of national level. But I suppose it's worth thinking about from a business point of view as well, whether you're corporate, SME, or even a small business. What that you have built relies on a frontier model from another country. And if you have got things that rely on that, how do you mitigate that risk that they could just be turned off at some point? And there's a few approaches there. One is we don't use them. Probably not realistic, if we're honest, because we want that power potentially for some of the deep work or heavy lifting projects that we've got going on. So that's probably not going to work for us in all cases or most cases. But what we can do is look at fallbacks. Okay, so how do we reduce the risk in the event that a model is pulled or restricted in some way? Do we have a fallback in place? And that can be one of two or three things, really. It could be, can we just step down a model and go to, use Opus or Sonnet or something to do the work that we're doing? That might be possible. It might take longer. It might not be quite as robust an output. It might not be able to do things as, in as much detail, etc. But that might be okay. Another fallback could be to move to a completely new model from a different provider. So Anthropic pulls a model, we go and use one from Google, or we go and use one from OpenAI or something. So we can have a fallback in place to mitigate the risk in that way. I'm afraid, though, there is another option, and it sounds scary in the world of AI and automation and agentic workflows, etc. And that is that we go back to doing it the old way. So I think what I'm urging people to do here is, not be scared, but be mindful that if a model disappears, and you can't do the thing that model is doing for you any longer or for a period of time, do you still have that manual or previous fallback way of doing things in place? And by that I mean, if you've handed off something to a model that previously was done by a human being, do you still have that human being? Do you still have their knowledge documented in some way? Can you actually spin up that previous way of doing things to fill the gap? So I think it's just something to be mindful of. And this story comes from the UK government looking at this on a larger scale, but we can bring that right down to our own businesses and organisations and say, what if? So it's just kind of a bit of crisis management or kind of disruption planning that probably needs to be thought through and have that other way of working, that different mode of working set to one side just so that we can move to that if we need to. This week in Monzo, a challenger bank in the UK here, they had a problem with some of their payments and transfers, and they were able to, although it didn't quite work, they were able to basically move to an adjacent system that purportedly had all of the same features and functionality in it. So they could, in effect, hot swap to a different way of working. Now, actually, I don't think that fully worked for them, so there's some learning to do there. But that's an example there of one system not working and having something that you can swap in to continue doing the work that you do using that system. So that's story one. What happens if it gets switched off? What do? You need to have a think about it. Okay, second story then. This is an ongoing, I wouldn't say saga, but it's an ongoing story. And again, it is linked back to two stories that have been going on for quite some time now. And that is, again, that on the 18th of August, OpenAI said and put out a statement and a couple of companion articles about this, saying that they had paused reinforcement learning of the latest model. And the reason for that was that it was getting so good at hacking systems, it was getting so good at being ahead of the game, that they didn't actually have the facility or the ability to check or measure that and kind of control it, which is an interesting concept, that they've got models which are racing ahead and they've got ways internally of kind of having those cyber security issues kind of monitored that were behind. So what they've said is, we're going to stop this, we're going to slow things down, and we're going to get some of that kind of security harness in place before we continue with that reinforcement learning. So that's an interesting point, and I think it probably does sort of point towards a world where there is more openness to a degree coming out of the large language, the big AI labs, whereby they are saying, look, there are issues here. We're aware of them, but we're forging ahead. But sometimes we might just need to arrest development a little bit while we get other things sort of caught up in the background. And I think that's a good thing. Of course, it's a good thing. But the skeptic in me just wonders, again, is this just a lot of marketing and buzz and trying to get people excited about the new model? So it's called Astra, the new model from OpenAI. And, it's a strange world, isn't it? Right? So we're building these wonderful, amazing tools, but these wonderful, amazing tools can break into all of our legacy tools, and it can do potentially some damage. So what do we need to do? Whilst the big players are kind of getting on with these advancements, what can we do? Well, again, I did talk about this last week, and it's about hardening what we've already got, because these models are going to continue progressing. They're going to get faster and better at performing actions which necessarily we don't want them to do. So you need to look at your systems. You need to pick one or two of the top kind of risk areas in your business. Is that payments? Is that some kind of transactional system? It might be a production system. It could be an ERP. But you need to have a look at that, and you need to run some tests against it. You need to speak to your developers. You need to go out to your vendors. You can actually use like an AI-assisted kind of auditing tool to do that. And that could just be one of the models we're talking about. Some of these frontier models could be used to attempt some penetration or to run some tests across the surface of a system that you have or you maintain or you subscribe to as an organization, and just look for vulnerabilities, and spot where potentially you might need to do some remedial work as these new models do get released, because they will get released. Whilst OpenAI have slowed down the training of this new model, they're not going to not release the next big thing. That is definitely going to come down the line, and we just need to think about being a bit more prepared for that. So I guess it's a bit of a sort of a security concern again. Right, I think that's enough on that one. Right, story number 3. This kind of blows my mind. I mean, it's not new in some regards, but it's a really interesting one. Because Google has bought a dead airline's corporate inbox. What's happened here is there's an airline in the US called Spirit Airlines that has been around since, back in the 80s. But basically, they've been going through challenges and bankruptcy, and they've not made it through, basically. So there are liquidators in place who are clearly, doing what liquidators do, which is trying to make some money back and pay off creditors, all that kind of stuff. And as part of this, this massive corporate data set has been auctioned. Okay, and there was a couple of kind of people who were sort of scrapping to win this. One was called Mercor, which is like an AI hiring platform, but Google won out. Okay, they've got very, very deep pockets, and they actually won this sale or this auction of Spirit Airlines internal data. They've spent $10 million on it, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's chicken feed. Like it's nothing, is it, to Google? So they've spotted an opportunity to get their hands on some data. And why have they done it? Training. Okay, they have got access to, it's roughly, I'm looking at my notes here, 100 million emails and 500 Microsoft Teams messages, plus a load of HR files, audits, financial databases, pricing models, the lot. Everything that this business had been built on for the past kind of, 40 years has been sold to Google. And they've bought it. And of course, they're going to use that to train their own models, which is nuts. But it's really cool if you Google, because you've got this corpus of data, which is going to help you train on a real business that's been in business for a long time. There's lots of data there. There's lots of information there. But also, it's a bit weird, isn't it? It's a bit dodge. And I just wonder what this kind of means. They have said that it's all going to be anonymized, etc., which I guess is relatively easy to do in some of those kind of structured systems. Like, okay, we've got an HR system, just like anonymize all of the people's names and addresses, etc. That's quite an easy one to do. But there's a bit of an issue with kind of the more unstructured messaging, etc. Because whilst you can remove, the email address of the person that sent the Teams message, or you can take out, some information around the users that created it. What about all of the hidden information that's in those messages? When Sally messages Steve on a Tuesday and references Bill, with that much data, the compute power that Google have got available to them, they can actually infer a lot from that information. Whether that is a GDPR compliance issue, etc., in the UK, I'm not an expert. But this sort of de-identification of data sounds great, but I think the power of an AI model when looking at that would very quickly see through the systemized de-identification or anonymization of that data to build a picture of that organization. And that will go far and deep, okay? That will get into lots and lots of inferences and understandings about those people and how that all worked. So, it makes us wonder, doesn't it, about our own data. And it's stored in our business at the moment, but if we sell our business, it fails, and then that data is given to a model. What does that then model know about us, our business, the people in that business, the customers, the interactions, etc.? So this is yet to be ratified by the courts. It's yet to get to a point where actually it can be sold and used. But it's a really interesting story, I thought, and one that popped up this week. So that's Google buying Spirit Airlines emails, chats, and a whole ton of other data for 10 million quid, which is like 20p. And they've got a really nice kind of Acme Limited to train their models on. Interesting stuff. Okay, that's it for Weekly Update 5. Have a fantastic Friday and enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you next week.